Hello, it's Ian again, another VBlog. Just thought I'd give you an update. Today I went to Manchester and back, and I thought I'd give you an update on the things I've seen on the road. Interested in your comments on what you think. Made a few notes because there's so much to talk about. First of all, on the way up to Manchester on the M6, there was an interesting scenario with an ambulance. And I think that emergency vehicles are not often spotted very early. Now, I saw an ambulance in lane 3, must have been a mile away at the point I saw it. But it was quite clear that most of the vehicles near me and in front of me had not seen it. It does sort of beg the question about the awareness, the level of awareness that drivers have, and maybe how far behind or in front they're thinking. They certainly didn't react to it. However, one of the things that I felt could have been certainly a lot better was that there was two wagons. Quite clearly, in a normal situation, they're going to want to overtake each other. However, if I was there's two trucks in the distance climbing up a hill, to be fair, but I'm not quite sure why the truck moved out into lane 2, when if he had very good observation in his side mirrors, then he would have seen there was an ambulance. And what that caused was the traffic that was already in lane 3 and the traffic in lane 2 then moved out to lane 3, and actually slowed down, the motorway, which made it much more difficult for the ambulance to get through. So, I mean, I understand that the wagon might have struggled to keep up with the speed of the traffic, etc., in that situation, but did he really need to pull out in that situation, and what were his observations like? And the other thing, whilst I think about it, was that it sometimes worries me about the length of time and the timing when truck drivers put their signals on. Now, I have a great deal of respect for lorry drivers. They do long hours, hard work, and they do have to have regular training too, but one thing I think that I feel they could improve is the timing of their signals. So interesting sort of scenario, really. So if you've got any feedback on that, I'd be interested to see, was it something that the wagon driver could have done differently. Breakdowns on Twitter. This morning there was a chap put some really useful comments saying that we really should be checking our spare on a regular basis, spare tyre. Now that's of course if you have one, because a lot of the modern vehicles, particularly cars, don't tend to have a spare tyre anymore. My personal view is that I think that's a little bit silly, a little bit crazy, because ultimately, what can you do if you have got a puncture? So difficult one. But he has a valid point about checking the spare tyre, checking the pressure, checking that it's legal, checking that you've got one, checking you've got a toolkit, all that. Absolutely. One of the comments that he makes is that everybody should know how to change a tyre or wheel. Yeah, I tend to agree with that. The caveat on that, though, is that although I believe people should know how to do that, I also believe that people should think about the risks involved in terms of changing a tyre by the roadside. Now, that came into fruition where I actually saw, I must have seen at least 3 vehicles today up and down the M6 with issues with tyres. Now, the first one I came across was a Ford Galaxy. There was a family, obviously, that was inside it. They'd done all the right things. They were standing behind the barrier, etc., etc., and they'd obviously called out breakdown services. That's exactly what I would be doing in that scenario. The next guy was a white van, like a Peugeot Partner or whatever, that type of vehicle, and he had a puncture. Now, in fairness, he had the puncture on the near side and the Galaxy was on the off side, which is a lot more dangerous. Even so, he was changing the tyre by the roadside on the motorway on the hard shoulder. Now, from my perspective, that's a pretty dangerous place. It's nowhere I would want to be very quickly or for very long. So, and at Touchwood, I've never really been there, but I don't really want to be with wagons coming past. High speed, very heavy, really not a wise idea to be changing the tyre by the roadside, and that's a really good point in terms of making sure you have breakdown cover. So, and also know the rules in terms of breakdowns, but yeah, quite critical, that one. And also the point of checking not only the spare but the tyres in general, because you know, if the lady in the Galaxy or the chap with the van had checked his tyres more regularly, would that puncture have occurred, and would it have had to occur on the motorway? So, interesting point. So yeah, there was I wrote these down. So much stuff happened. Cyclist overtake on the way. Yeah, there was a scenario where as you come in towards Manchester, there's a dual carriageway section, and I saw a cyclist in the distance. I could see about 2 sets of traffic lights. I'm happy with them in the far distance. So there's a long gap between them, and I'm looking to move into lane 2 to do an overtake past the cyclist on two lanes. So giving a signal to the chap behind. He was not really keen on letting me in, but I did want to move in to allow the cyclist to move in. So I moved into lane 2. He then proceeded, bearing in mind I'm doing the speed limit and the vehicles ahead are doing the speed limit, he just wanted to go quicker than that. So I move into lane 2, and then he proceeds to move into lane 1 behind me and shave the cyclist. So we're talking, I mean, I could show you on it's sort of that sort of distance past the cyclist as he comes by. Highway code says we should leave at least the same as we would a car to overtake a vulnerable road user. The main point there, of course, is that if he wobbles, falls over, whatever, he's got no protection pretty much. He's on a bike, he's probably got no helmet on, so I like to leave, you know, plenty of room. But I didn't quite understand why he wanted to move into lane 1. I moved into lane 1 after that point, and he was actually still behind me, so he wouldn't, and then he ended up overtaking, and then he was 1 car ahead at the next 3 sets of traffic lights. So I just thought it was slightly strange behaviour, and I've seen that a few times. So again, if you've got any feedback on that, as to the reasons why you might do it, or whether or not it's something you can reflect on your own drive, you know, so I find it very difficult with cyclists in terms of, I tend to try and leave them plenty of room, but I'm not quite sure why other drivers are not doing that. Bearing in mind last year, we went down on killed people on the roads. It went down from like 1900 down to 1754, but cyclist deaths went up 10%. So there's obviously more we can be doing there. Yeah, there's also a cyclist on the way back. Now there was a point about 2 or 3 months ago where I overtook a cyclist, and I wish I hadn't done it, because the lights changed to red, and I sort of realised and thought to myself that I need to make sure I plan ahead a bit better with that. It's a bit of reflection on my own drive. It was a slight left-hand bend, couldn't quite see the traffic lights around the corner, did the overtake, and then ended up having to stop, and the cyclist came alongside me and I had to overtake them again. So on overtakes on cyclists, I'm a lot more considerate in terms of when I'm going to do the overtake. And there was a lady on a bike in Manchester, and I actually saw the lights ahead, and they'd been on green for ages, and I made my decision that the overtake was pointless. Now, in fairness, I can understand in terms of progress and annoyance from the people behind, but one lady actually overtook me, pulled into lane 1 in front of me, bearing in mind I'm behind the cyclist, then had to stop at the lights, and she didn't actually gain anything from that. So and at the same time the cyclist then moved in front of her, so it was not particularly a well thought out sort of process. So again, if you've got any feedback on that and how you deal with it, to be fair, I could have stayed in lane 2, but I think that again would have annoyed people in terms of you need to move back in. So difficult one. I felt like I was also protecting the cyclist, because most people I saw overtaking the cyclist beforehand did not give this lady very much room to do it. It actually turned out that further up ahead she did a right turn, so yeah, it's just giving her a bit of space really. Interesting scenario with a motorcyclist and a taxi on the M56 coming out of Manchester. So you've got the turn off towards the airport, and there was a taxi driver in lane 1. He's coming off towards the airport. Oh, he's in lane 2, sorry, and then he went to move into lane 1. At the same time, there was actually a cyclist alongside him. Now, I always think there's 2 sides or possibly more to a story, but watching what happened, the taxi driver moved into lane 1. alongside the motorcyclist. Now, personally, if I'd have been the motorcyclist, I would have held back a little bit more, and if I was the taxi driver, I would have done more observations, or at least, you know, tried to. And he was in the blind spot of the taxi, but it just goes to show. I mean, that was it was very close to a near miss. I'm very surprised that nothing actually occurred from that. So quite a scary scenario. Luckily, nothing happened, but. Yeah, let me know if you've seen that, if you've witnessed it actually happen when it has gone a little bit further wrong than that. So yeah, I'm coming down the A556 now, and it's an interesting point, that road. If you've ever come out of Manchester on the 556 and then down the M6 south, you might recognise this, and there is there's always interesting scenarios there. Effectively, it's a link road between the M56 and the M6, so it's quite busy, particularly at rush hour time, and it's got several traffic lights that last quite long for rural routes either side, so you do get quite a lot of essentially start-stop traffic. So at that time of day, with the amount of traffic, what tends to happen is you get quick moving. It's a 50 mile an hour road, quick moving traffic doing 50 plus mile an hour. Usually they don't go much more than that. There are speed cameras on that stretch, because there's obviously been issues on that stretch before, yeah, the traffic tends to stop, and then start moving very quickly again, and then come to a stop, and then start moving. So I try and iron that out. My key thing is really to keep a nice gap, and to try and keep the car rolling. Now, the whole journey back, with the exception of filling up with fuel coming out of Sainsbury's, I did only probably 1 or 2 complete stops of the car. All the rest of the time, the vehicle kept rolling forward. There was no need for a full stop on any of that route except twice. So it goes to show, planning ahead. We don't always need to do that stop-start traffic, and I'm really. It comes to a point that on the motorway as well, that the motorway, again, we talked about the M6 before, about the traffic flow, and again I hit 70 on this route, but the sustainability of 70 mile an hour at that point is, you can't do it. So one of the things that really concerns me, and this is on the A556 and the M6, is that traffic tends to speed up when I can see traffic in the distance is slowing down. So they're coming together like this, and you actually see people accelerating towards it, and I'm not quite sure exactly what the reason is for that. My thoughts are that it could be the fact that the most car drivers or van drivers or trucks or whatever are not quite planning far enough ahead. They've got their eyes quite short in terms of where they're looking. If I can see a mile down the motorway ahead, if it's a slight right, slight left, I'm looking as far as I possibly can see. If there's slow moving traffic, I'm on my brakes nice and early to warn traffic from behind. But we've got traffic now approaching, stationary traffic accelerating towards it. And rear end shunts are the most common crash in the UK. So, and it's probably the same across the whole world actually. So it confuses me while we're wasting fuel, and fuel's expensive, and accelerating towards a problem when we really don't need to. So interesting points there. The other thing was, there was a guy behind me. He seemed to be, well, he was talking to himself. He was either hands-free by the looks of it on a mobile, but extremely close behind me in a silver Ford Focus. Very, very close, not maintaining a gap, weaving inside his lane, and even though he was hands-free, you could see that the concentration level wasn't there. So it's a good point that, even when we're hands-free, we're not always thinking about it. Now, the other thing was now I've said this before, and I say it again, that I don't always keep up to the full 70 on the motorway, especially when I know the traffic's pretty slow, and on the motorway most of the time that isn't the case. But there was actually a point where we were all doing 70 mile an hour pretty much. The lorry drivers were few and far between. I'm doing 70 mile an hour in lane 1. In the distance there's a van, and he's doing about 49, 50 mile an hour, and only just doing that. So it's quite worrying, and I'm certainly someone that, I don't like to race forward, and I don't like to go really, really quick. I don't necessarily using the whole speed limit, but at the same time, I'm not trying to hinder the traffic from behind. So that was quite a scary moment, and that also that happened on the A500 as well, on the 70 mph section. We got a car doing 45-50 mile an hour in lane 1, luckily, but you know, we got traffic doing 70 mile an hour, and is that really an appropriate speed? So yeah, quite interesting. In fact, there was a car coming down the Select Road earlier onto the 70 at 40 mile an hour thereabouts. So yeah, I'm just wondering whether or not that's distraction, or is it concern in terms of controlling speed. Not sure. Interesting scenario on the motorway again, with a Volkswagen Passat driver, similar to what we had the other day, where I wasn't swapping lanes, but there was a chap from lane 3 moving towards me into lane 2, and he was looking to move into lane 1. I'm not quite sure if he saw me or not, so I'm backing off. But the reason for the lane change, traffic was slowing down in lanes 2 and 3 ahead. It's quite a common scenario, and he wanted to take lane 1 to zip down the left hand side and speed up, and then move back out again. Similar type of situation later on for the exit slip. We got a van driver that was actually just overtook me into lane 2, and then he intended to come off at the next junction. He moves into lane 3, absolutely tanks it down lane 3 really quickly, and then moves straight in from lane 3 onto the exit slip. Very scary stuff, both from the Passat driver doing a lane change in order to try and make progress to move back in again, but also the van driver moving from lane 3 straight over to lane 0. How much difference does that make to your drive? How much risk is involved in that? Do people care when they do it? Why are they doing it? Are they aggravated? Are they annoyed? Are they driving when they're very emotional? I'm really not sure. Yeah, there was a chap a bit later on where we were coming off. I was going towards Sainsbury's, coming off on a junction off a 2-lane road onto a slip downhill underneath the underpass. I moved to lane 2, speed limit goes down to 30 from a 40, slowing it down. Black Volkswagen Golf, and he undertakes me in lane 1. He arrives at the traffic lights by fluke when they change. I'm trying to time it, and yeah, we talked earlier on. In fact, there's a chap walking down the middle of the road here. He's in my street. We got footpaths on both sides. Oh, he's just moved back to the footpath, but people do that. They walk straight down the middle of the road. Not quite sure why. Sorry, got distracted there. Yeah, so he undertook me. What's interesting is when we got to the 3rd set of traffic lights, he actually stopped, and I overtook him again because my lane was moving and his wasn't. He was turning left. How much did he gain from the undertake? I mean, undertaking, generally speaking, it's not wise to do. The highway code suggests against it. There are 1 or 2 exceptions, but generally speaking, we shouldn't be undertaking the traffic. And he obviously thought that he would get there quicker by doing that, but incidentally, again, from the proof in terms of when I got there, it didn't make any difference at all. Finally, I'm going to leave it on 2 more things, so I'm running out of time on the video here. First one's pedestrian crossing the road. There was one in Manchester near Asda. Quite a scary scenario really, because he decided to cross the road on a very busy crossroads. It appeared without looking. There was a pedestrian light system. He decided not to use it. I really can't get my head around when people do that. He wasn't rushing, he was taking his time. He was actually looking at his mobile whilst he was crossing the road. It puts a lot of emphasis on the other road users to look out for them. Quite scary. And then the other one was later on in Stoke. A gentleman walk off the pavement knowing that I'm coming up the road, and there was a car coming the other way as well, continuing to cross fairly steadily, and just continuing to cross, and there was a car behind me. So I'm putting my brake lights on, I'm sort of looking at what he's doing, and he's continuing to cross the road in front of me. Now that forced me to slow down, so quite scary. And finally, because I am running out of time, cyclists. Really, I have no problem with cyclists, but cyclists without brakes, without reflectors, no helmets, no protective gear, no road sense, crossing the road when there's vehicles coming, really scary stuff. And I've seen that lately in Stoke, I've seen it in Manchester, we saw it outside Asda as well. Cyclists coming the wrong way down the road, really scary stuff. Any comments on that? Let me know if you've seen anything like that, or what you think of the sort of things I've seen. So yeah, let me know what you think. Thank you.